Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Adler. I'm Principal Product Manager here at ServiceNow. I work on platform security out of our platform business unit. And today I'm going to talk to you about the new features that have been introduced in our Kingston release. Kingston release was released this year in January. Now, part of the introduction, or agenda rather, keep it pretty straightforward. We've got give you an introduction, go into a feature deep dive specific to the Kingston release for Edge Encryption, and then along the way, I'd like to gather and address your questions, look at your feedback, any kind of insights from your perspective. I am keenly interested in as well. And then I'll wrap up with some reference material that you can use in the future when you're looking at this particular technology. Now, a little bit about me, a little bit about Mike. I grew up in the Amish country, transplanted out to California, and yeah, that is an Amish buggy, and it's not self-autonomous. But now I'm in Silicon Valley. Love getting to work on two wheels instead of four wheels, and it's quite active also. So, in addition, I wanted to let you know my professional background. We'll go ahead and talk about that. Started ServiceNow about 3 years ago, but worked for a lot of multinationals prior to that, and wear a lot of hats here at ServiceNow in terms of sales, customer success, evangelize our technologies, and also speak at several events at Knowledge, Now Forums, ServiceNow users group. So if you do have a user group coming up that you'd like me to present or speak at, I'd be happy to try to work that into my schedule. But again, on any given day, typically, I am your voice of the customer. I have a lot of influence on types of features, capabilities that we have on our ServiceNow platform. So again, I'm probably a good person to connect with in that regard. And also, again, in the spirit of success, I work very closely with our services groups as well as our partners to make sure they're enabled as well to successfully implement our Edge Encryption product. Now, I like to kind of step back non-technically in terms of using data in the cloud, or basically a cloud service provider like ServiceNow. And yeah, it was nice while it lasted in terms of trusting your data in the cloud, but three themes have cropped up over the years in terms of that data being handled, or basically leaving a legacy environment and then making that digital transformation out to ServiceNow. And that's really in the realm of basically good security hygiene around defending against people trying to hack into your network, get access to your data, whether you might have a rogue employee within the company. And then we branch out to multinationals or just basically international companies where they have particular concerns around jurisdiction over their data, and they have different kinds of laws around that. Or if ServiceNow being a company that resides outside of their jurisdiction, what are the exposures there? So Edge Encryption addresses those types of concerns about trusting their data in the cloud. And of course, there's all kinds of privacy drivers as well, whether it's emotional or actual regulatory, such as the GDPR in Europe, or vendor or vertical specific, with different types of applications you might run on the cloud that use data, such as our human resources service management solution. So the basic theme is, overall, is that we have a great relationship with our customers. They definitely want to trust us. Of course, their customers maybe not so much, because they're really entrusting their data with our customers, and who in turn entrust that data with ServiceNow. Now, this theme, or basically the the topic of this particular webinar is all about the Kingston release. But I thought it was worthwhile letting you know how we got here. I joined ServiceNow around the Fuji release, and I'll step back from that for folks watching and listening. ServiceNow names its releases after cities and alphabetical order. Hence, we start with Fuji and then Geneva. Our timing is basically, our cadence is about every 6 months. We introduce a new feature release. And Edge Encryption itself, I launched back in December 2015 in our Geneva release. And we've been incrementally improving that product ever since then. So you can get an appreciation of our journey with Edge Encryption, adding additional functionality to it along the way. And that brings us up to the far right to Kingston. And then you see a picture there to the right of yet another city. And that's going to be in the summer time frame or early summer time frame. And it begins with an L. So that's looking to be the London release, in case you were wondering what that might be. Let's go look at again, I apologize for folks who are already familiar with Edge Encryption, but for those folks that want a refresher or are fairly new to the product, I want to give you this 50,000-foot view of the Edge Encryption solution. There are basically two components to this particular solution. One, of course, that runs on a customer premises within their own network that acts as an encryption gateway to encrypt and decrypt data traversing out to ServiceNow. And then there's the other component at ServiceNow where you have the data that actually runs, that you run with your applications and store and use while it's encrypted at rest. Now that said, it's really important to focus a bit first on the left side of this diagram, and in particular the upper left-hand part of the diagram. Because if you just for a moment forget about the technical part of the solution, you're really driven by what your data encryption policies are. Generally, your security infosec group crafts those particular policies, and they need technical capability to actually implement those policies. And that's where Edge Encryption comes in. So you define, say, like a particular field or a particular attachment used by a particular application. So you know what it is, what the application is acting on it, and how that information needs to be treated, namely to be encrypted. So that's really the relationship between your policies and your Edge Encryption gateway, which is going to basically administer your policies. That said, we can actually now finally understand better that that's really going to influence your humans interacting with ServiceNow, say through a browser. That's where we have that icon for a laptop, and web services, of course, where it might not necessarily be a browser session you're using to use ServiceNow, but actually your own APIs. So we do support APIs. We'll get into that later in this webinar. But the idea here is no matter whether it's machine-to-machine interface using web services or your browser, the idea is that unbeknownst to those particular entry points, the data is always used in the clear. So we have a social security number, national ID number, you name it, whatever information it is that is the target to be encrypted is in the clear. So we have that here in that little icon right next to the browser and the web services icon. And that's basically going to be part of your ServiceNow payload, data payload. And that contains all the bits that you want to store and use at ServiceNow. That said, that information, that payload, will go to your Edge Encryption proxy. The Edge Encryption proxy will actually look at that particular payload it will use encryption rules with its encryption engine that come with ServiceNow, Edge Encryption, and any other custom encryption rules that you might define as well for custom record producers, because that's really what your Edge Encryption rules are working on or working with are record producers. That said, you'll have encryption keys. Obviously, that's the other core component. That's what you see in the red circle with a key in it. That's going to encrypt the data that you send out to ServiceNow. It's important to note or worth mentioning that those encryption keys are going to reside locally within your customer premises. So you've got that protection back to I was talking to you before about protecting your keys or protecting your data. They both are outside of ServiceNow, so ServiceNow could never see that information in the clear. And that's why we can progress to further to the right. Once that ServiceNow payload gets processed by Edge Encryption, the fields or attachments for that matter that were configured to be encrypted are now in ciphertext when they're in a form to leave your network. And that means in transit, and that data is encrypted as well at the application layer. And it remains that in that state when it's in use on your ServiceNow instance, and when that data is dormant at any point in time residing on your instance as well. That basically gives you the end-to-end life cycle or data flow for your information. And then conversely, on the way back from ServiceNow to your customer network, that information is only able to be decrypted and used in the clear once it passes through your Edge Encryption proxy. So that Edge Encryption proxy is designed to be quite efficient. It's in line for your ServiceNow traffic, so you could also call it gate encryption gateway. And that's going to basically let you, send and receive your information transparently from the perspective of your internal users or internal web services. I'd like to get now to the new features. I won't go into existing features for Edge Encryption. We do have other seminars and documentation on the product itself. But I wanted to get into the new features that we have with the product coming out and that came out in the Kingston release. So before Kingston, we had a limitation on the types of fields that you could encrypt. And specifically, that was string field types, say like your short description, long description, and an incident record. There's actually quite a fair number of fields already before Kingston that you could encrypt, not counting your own custom defined fields. And of course, you've got file attachments to records that you can encrypt. So with Kingston, what we've done is extended the types of fields that you can encrypt to URL fields and journal fields. Now with URL fields, you're thinking, well, how many, why is that so important? Well, when you think about how you use ServiceNow as a system of record, you've got pointers to other information that holds information that's sensitive. Therefore, when you have, say, like in an HR type of transaction, and there's an onboarding process where there's a background check or a medical or drug background check that uses outside services, the customers will have a link as opposed to the actual results of that background check. And that's where you can actually encrypt the URL pointing to that background check. And the little snippet that I have to the right here on this slide gives you an idea of what that interface looks like when you're when your security admin on the ServiceNow platform is setting up your URL field type. Similarly, we've got journal field types, which is one that is near and dear to me. I'm really excited about this particular new feature, and that you can encrypt journal input fields would be like your additional comments, your work note fields, basically that field that carries an ongoing history of what happens with a record. So if you're working with an incident, a change, for example, and you'll have that comments and notes tab. And you'll be able to encrypt that information now as well. And I gave a very simple example where your security admin is setting up the, here we've got the comments field, basically your additional comments field, and the incident table to be encrypted. Next, this one is quite a busy slide, but it's actually simplified, believe it or not. The IP blacklist feature is something that was in demand, and I found just personally working with customers as they really got into rolling out Edge encryption into their own networks. And as it turned out, customers were running vulnerability scans in their network, which I of course encourage. However, when they run a vulnerability scan on an Edge encryption proxy host, basically where a server, a virtual machine or physical machine where Edge encryption is installed, there's where things kind of get interesting. Because Edge encryption works as a reverse proxy, the payloads that get sent to it automatically get forwarded to the ServiceNow cloud. That said, if a customer runs a vulnerability scan, that vulnerability scan also gets forwarded to ServiceNow. And as a result, ServiceNow looks at that as somebody trying to run a pen test at a minimum against that customer's instance, and that's not good. Customer gets notified of that particular event and to investigate and stop running vulnerability scans against their ServiceNow instance. If the customer wants to run a pen test on their ServiceNow instance, that's something that gets coordinated with ServiceNow's application security or platform security group. We've basically taken away or simplified that scenario by letting customers go ahead and identify the IP range of the vulnerability scanner on the network that is targeting the Edge encryption proxy, and to basically block traffic that originates from that particular vulnerability scanner net, in this case, from going out to ServiceNow. So I wanted to actually illustrate this here better. Because the security admin for ServiceNow enters in an IP address range. They make sure that active checkbox is checked. Never hurts to add a description, even though it's not required, but adding in a description just makes it easier to maintain. And go ahead and either update or save that particular configuration. And at that point, the proxy adds that to its own configuration, and it looks up the source IP address of the sender, and if there is a match, then that particular payload will not exit the Edge encryption proxy. Say you run a curl command, you'll see a 403 forbidden error as well, or if you're at a browser, you'll see a 403 error on your browser page. So that's really the intent of this particular feature. I've heard other customers actually saying that they want to do other things with this because they want to basically have another means to control traffic going to ServiceNow. And since Edge encryption acts as a gateway to from an internal network to ServiceNow, some customers are looking at purposing it for that. But that's not the main intent of it, but I just thought you might be interested in knowing that particular approach or people are considering. Next thing is really cool too is our performance dashboard and also enhanced messaging in the log files for the Edge encryption proxy. So prior to Kingston, You could still get an idea of the health statistics on your Edge encryption proxy by looking at the proxy log files on the machine where the proxy is being hosted. Well, we tried, what we ended up doing is to make it easier and more informative by providing a performance dashboard and leveraging the already existing performance dashboard user interface we have for ServiceNow. And what we were looking to do with the log messages is basically, help you be able to, preempt potential issues or anomalies that you might observe with traffic going through your Edge proxy, or in terms of being able to identify where there might be something where you need more than one Edge encryption proxy if you find that you're basically exceeding its capacity. And we do have sizing requirements that customers use for their implementation. So if over time their environment changes and they outgrow their Edge encryption proxy, the early indicators that they're heading in that direction can be evident in the performance dashboard. In terms of messaging, we're making it easier for customers to identify and understand messages that they see in their log files, as opposed to seeing a particular message with a short description of why that warning, for example, was raised. They'll get a link embedded in that message to a knowledge base article to actually pull up the whole article related to that particular message in their log file and understand what it is, and where there's actionable information to use. That'll also be at the disposal of the person using that log file. Here's a bit of a screenshot in terms of what that performance dashboard looks like. And this is leveraging the ServiceNow performance dashboard, and we've got a graph set specifically dedicated for your Edge encryption proxy. You can see that here in the upper left-hand corner pull-down menu. And you pull the if you have more than one proxy, you would have more than one monitorable item, and then you can also do a time range in terms of the range of data that you want to see. The main components here I like to keep in mind is in terms of seconds for processing the payloads, average processing time. Further down, you can get the maximum performance in terms of the key health indicators of the proxy machine itself in terms of CPU, memory utilization, and disk utilization, and get the maximum spikes in that, as well as your performance averages on the devices, as well as network latency. Definitely, it's good to have as close to zero as possible. In this example, this was as good as possible. The other cool thing, though, you could actually get more granular on the performance of your Edge encryption proxy machines in terms of the total round trip between your browser to the proxy to ServiceNow and back. So you've got those particular segments and the links between you and ServiceNow, and that's why we made this as granular as we did. So you can understand what the round trip time is, what the response time is, what the within the Edge encryption proxy itself, and those encryption rules that process your ServiceNow data payload. Understand the processing on that, as well as the request time in terms of between your browser and the Edge encryption proxy, for example. So those are all really key health metrics, performance metrics that we provide to make it easier for you to understand how your solution is working for you. I just wanted to kind of, I talked a lot about that whole performance monitoring, but I thought it was good to actually show you, graphically here. You've got your browser request, your client goes to the Edge encryption proxy. There's one snippet of performance data. Same thing on the return trip, the proxy response. So even if your requester is doing just fine and proxy seems to be fine, but maybe there's an issue or something that's disrupting traffic, this would be a good indicator to help with troubleshooting. There might be network issues, for example, there. Then you've got your processing time for the rule engine, encryption rule engine. So maybe you crafted your own Edge encryption rules in addition to the ones that come with Edge encryption out of the box. And that could be an indicator if you've written overly complicated Edge encryption rule that's just really taken up processing time that could be optimized. And that's another metric. And then you've got, similar to the browser, you've got proxy to ServiceNow and understanding what the request time is, time it takes to get to ServiceNow, and then on the way back. So these, together, these 5 particular metrics are going to be really helpful for making sure that everything's working as expected, or there's anomalies that might be symptomatic of something else afoot. I had mentioned the messaging. So this is brand new for Kingston as well. We have this convention here, and this is really cool because not just Edge encryption, but other applications are going to follow our lead in terms of a convention we're using for different error codes. So we've got now hyphen namespace, name of the application, and then the error code for that application. So this will give a lot more insight as to who's kicking up that particular error in your log files, and then in the error report itself, it will leverage that information, and you'll get different views in terms of charts, but also let you do drill downs into errors that are surfaced when you're running your Edge encryption proxy. Now, this is something you probably don't want to see in your Edge encryption proxy. You probably don't want to see any errors. But for illustration purposes, wanted to show you, starting in Kingston, how you get access to error reports to see if there are any errors kicked out. And then being able to see the class of errors that you might be getting. And so you can see like key store missing, something related to your Edge encryption configuration. And so to get the detail on that error, all you'd have to do is just click on the graph to get more information on that particular set of errors or error. And let's just say, for illustration purposes, that you did find a particular error, say with the key store. You just drill into that. You would get the actual name of the error. And remember, I was telling you about the knowledge base article. This is where you would go ahead and get the URL for that particular error. And again, this follows that convention in terms of now Edge signature error. So we know that it's obviously ServiceNow, products Edge, and the type of error, it's a signature error. In terms of how the user interface looks like, what that looks like, it's pretty straightforward. Everything that we went through before, as well as the timestamp on it. And again, if you wanted to go ahead and look at the knowledge base article, there would be a link to that under related links in that particular window. And voila, there we imagine we clicked on the link for that knowledge base article, and you get the knowledge base article. See the KB identifier there on the upper right, and what the basically root cause, the effect of it, and what can I do about it. So end to end, this probably is going to save measurable amount of time for your security admins or whoever's doing the care and feeding of Edge encryption for you. You'll have this new feature to actually drill down and do something about and understand at a minimum of error messages that they see in the log file. I wanted to get into the next new feature. This next new feature is about the API or web services. We've added JSON version 2 support. So if you're familiar with the other web service support we provided, that was with REST and SOAP APIs. And so for Kingston, we've also added JSON v2. And so in a nutshell, what that does, it allows you to have multiple JSON requests, or basically process JSON v2 requests and posts in that particular format. But everything else has been the same. And what I really like about that too is, if I'm trying to create a new encryption rule for a custom record producer, I simply use a create encryption rule link for that record producer, and this new feature will automatically create JSON v2 rules for you. So if you're not, and let me go back here, if you're not a ServiceNow developer, you probably don't have to be concerned about that if you don't need to write your own encryption rules. But if you do want to write your own encryption rules, you'll have JSON v2 available for you too. So that is the main part here. Let me see if I've got a little bit of time to do some show and tell. I do. So I want to go over to a browser session. That's going to minimize my window over here. And so here's the left browser tab is what I'm showing here is going through an Edge Encryption proxy. If you think about that illustration I had earlier about the topology of how this is implemented, this is actually going through the Edge Encryption proxy sitting on a server. The right tab is actually bypassing over here, session timed out. I'll get onto that later. But essentially, I wanted to show you some of the new features here I think are cool. If you're familiar with configuring your fields, for example, you can see here I've got incident table, work notes. I can always change that. But if, let's say I wanted to create a new configuration, let's say on problem. And you can see here we've got additional comments, which is a journal field, as well as work notes is a journal field too. And I could select those. Previously, you wouldn't see these as selectable fields when you're setting up an Edge Encryption configuration. So if we looked at, same thing goes with that URL type. So if we're looking at an HR case table, for example, we would see that. One of the other things I wanted to show you too was under maintenance, I wanted to show you the IP blacklist. So you can see here I've got an existing configuration for my Edge Encryption proxy. I can open it. And it was a matter of just me entering in the actual IP address, what I wanted to actually block. And I just put in a description there and I saved it. One of the other things worth mentioning too is if you ever wanted to stop activating or stop blocking, all you would have to do is uncheck the active checkbox and then save your change in that regard. So we'll go back. And that in a nutshell covers the new features. I think the one thing you can't see, if you're familiar with APIs, basically the REST SOAP APIs for attachments. Previously, you couldn't you could do API calls, or you at the field level encrypt fields through web services, but attachments weren't supported. So now we support attachment encryption through web services, in addition to what we already could through simple browser-based attachment encryption. And I'm going to pause there. I'm going to go advance to the feedback insights slide and check to see if we've got any questions that I can address or now or come back to you later on.
I'm not seeing any posted on the live chat at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, after viewing this webinar, if you have any other questions for me, and you also want to look at some resources, we've got an encryption white paper that's available. You can get that actually through our .com site, but I have the URL here for your convenience. There should be .pdf, not .pd there. Just notice that. And for the encryption white paper, that goes through the not just Edge encryption, but other encryption capabilities as well for the ServiceNow platform. Did mention the online documentation for Kingston. Check out the release notes link. That'll go into some more technical detail on what I covered today during this webinar. If you have access to the learning portal, we've got material up there covering Edge encryption as well. And of course, my beloved ServiceNow community, we've got a separate discussion area for Edge encryption under Now platform. So there's a lot of good resources there. Also coming up, we've got a few really good hands-on labs at Knowledge 18 this year in Las Vegas. I'll be actually leading one CreatorCon session, hands-on session, how to get up and running and use the product. And then we'll actually have another follow-on session that goes into a deeper dive at CreatorCon. Again, that's within Knowledge 18. That's going to get into actually writing your own API web services integrations for Edge encryption. So a lot of good stuff coming up this year, and look forward to hearing or seeing from you soon.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much. I wanted to also make sure that if we can include these slides as an attachment to the community post, and make sure that we get those links also as a reply in there as well.
By all means, Lisa.
All right, great. Thank you so much again, Mike, for your time. And we look forward to seeing you and everyone else on the community.
Great. Thank you.